B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, November 5th, 2018. It's been a long, dark road to the midterm elections. Is there sunshine on the other side? I wish I had an optimistic answer to my own question there, friends. So tomorrow, the voting will be rounding up. Many people already voted early, and a lot of people vote by mail now. I'm old-fashioned. I like the ritual of taking Chloe to the polling place first thing on Election Day morning and casting my ballot like I always have, and I will be doing that. And as we look at the landscape, it is scarred, charred. The American psyche has been brutalized by the darkest campaign that we've seen in my lifetime. The word apocalyptic shows up in many descriptions. I used the word in one of my headlines on Friday. The Washington Post, in an excellent piece by Philip Rucker today, headline, Full Trumpism, the President's Apocalyptic Attacks Reach a New Level of Falsity. And I'll note that Trump really only knows how to use what we call wedge politics, using an issue to divide people, to peel them off and force them onto his side of the aisle. And he's pretty damn good at it. It's ugly to watch. It is repugnant, repulsive to see the tactics and the extremely low bar that epitomize this campaign that is really a production of Donald J. Trump. He ignored a lot of the milquetoast Republicans who didn't want to make immigration the centerpiece of this campaign, but he insisted this is how he's going to turn out his voters. And because of the passivity of the Republicans who remain in that party, he now owns them lock, stock, and barrel. And Rucker writes, Trump is painting an astonishingly apocalyptic vision of America under Democratic control in the campaign's final days, unleashing a torrent of falsehoods, portraying his political opponents as desiring crime, squalor, and poverty. Trump is claiming that Democrats want to erase the nation's borders, provide sanctuary to drug dealers, human traffickers, and MS-13 killers. He is warning that they would destroy the economy, obliterate Medicare, and unleash a wave of violent crime that endangers families everywhere. And he's alleging that they would transform the U.S. into Venezuela with socialism run amok. Continuing to quote here from Rucker, Trump has never been hemmed in by fact, fairness, or even logic. The 45th president proudly refuses to apologize, routinely violates the norms of decorum that guided his predecessors, demagoguing the Democrats in a whirl of distortion and using the power of federal government to amplify his fantastical arguments. In Macon, Georgia, he charged that if Democrat Stacey Abrams is elected governor, she'd take away the Second Amendment. Now, he thinks he can wish away the 14th Amendment with an executive order. But Stacey Abrams has never made such a claim. She's only hoping to become governor of a state. And she knows she can't nullify the Second Amendment. Rucker continues, unmoored from reality. Trump has at times become a false prophet, too. He's been promising a 10% tax cut for the middle class, though no such legislation exists. He has sounded alarms over an imminent invasion of dangerous illegal aliens, referring to that caravan that includes many women and children, not expected to reach our border for several weeks, if at all. And here's a Republican, Mike Murphy. He's the guy who burned through $125 million of Meg Whitman's cash when she tried to buy the governor's office here in California. Murphy says he goes out and says crazy, horrible things, blows race whistles, sits back and watches his topic of craziness dominate cable TV for the next 24 hours. Everybody repeats his charge, then there's a lot of pearl clutching and tusking, and then repeating it again. And Obama's brain, David Axelrod, asks, hopefully, is there a point of diminishing returns? Do these tactics at once offend some people but also appear so fundamentally contrived that even some who are inclined to vote for Trump say, Well, you lost me here? It doesn't seem so. And as we sit here on this eve, the polls are really inconclusive. Many races are too close to call. It's pretty clear that the Republicans will hold on to the Senate, maybe even pick up a couple of seats there. And the House is so volatile. I am cautiously hopeful that the Democrats will regain control. But I don't think it'll be like by a huge margin. And the moderate conservatives, the former soldiers, spooks, and others who've been recruited by the Democrats, many former Republicans, I mean, what kind of a majority will it be if the gavel is given back to Nancy Pelosi? And Michael Waldman over at the Brennan Center at New York University, Trump's ideas are mostly stunts that serve to act as a semaphore. The executive order is flatly unconstitutional. The tax cut that is going to be passed by Election Day is non-existent. And the generated panic over the caravan and sending up to 15,000 troops to the border is expensive political theater and not much more. Now, the fact-checkers at the Washington Post, they've been working 24/7. In the 7 weeks leading up to the election, the president made 1,419 false or misleading claims, an average of 30 a day. That compares with 1,318 false or misleading claims during the first 9 months of his presidency, an average of 5 a day. And each of Trump's rallies usually yields 35 to 45 suspect claims. And there is this phrase that has surfaced that is so perverse and intellectually obscene. It's the pivot that they introduced after the Kavanaugh confirmation, where it's Democratic mobs that we have to be afraid of. And even after the pipe bomber and Bowers, who shot up and killed 11 people at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, both inspired by Trump, directly or indirectly, you pick, the mobs are on his side. But the propagandists on the Republican side are so persistent, and they are so oblivious to the truth, that they created this whole con job about jobs and mobs. And the New York Times, in a graphic article today, broke that down pretty effectively. And there is this phrase, Trumpocalypse, that I used in the headline for today's podcast. I've seen it used by John Nichols, the Nation writer, who published a profile of all Trump's appointees called the Horsemen of the Trumpocalypse, I think. And Paul McGuire, I think, deserves credit for coining the term. But that's what we're seeing. And Peter Baker at the New York Times says Trump embarks today on a final three-state swing that will close out an us against them midterm campaign built on dark themes of fear, anger, division, nationalism, and racial animosity. The president's thundering warnings about left-wing mobs and a migrant invasion have inflamed the passions of a country, energizing conservatives he hopes to mobilize to hang on to control of Congress, while exasperating opponents who accuse him of fear-mongering and demagogy. Trump declared, this is a further quote, that the election would be a referendum on him. And this is really what is going to, I think, be the study by political scientists after the fact. Was Pelosi correct in trying to avoid making this election about Trump, at least in messaging to Democrats and independents? Or was Trump right in making the election about him and ginning up more anger and more division as a way to energize his base, because turnout is going to be the key? So we're going to find out who calculated correctly. And as I felt on election eve, or the day before, 2 years ago, I have to give advantage Republicans at this moment. And again, if the Democrats succeed in taking back control of the House, it might slow down some of the efforts that Trump and his allies have undertaken. But it is not going to fully neutralize or even come close to reversing the damage that has occurred. And while the Democrats might shift on the impeachment question if they roll up a big victory, I don't have any confidence that they will actually pursue it to its end. And it's fascinating to note that Trump could be running on positive themes. Now, he does congratulate himself repeatedly, and at his mob rallies, he'll mention about the economy that he inherited from Obama that continues to grow. He doesn't talk about what he's done to the stock market with the trade war that has wiped out all the gains that were posted through the middle of October. And so, as the economy does improve, and a president 2 years in is going to take credit for it, whether you want to consider that to be accurate or not. Good piece in the Washington Post today by Margaret Sullivan. She used to be the people's editor at the New York Times, and she does a decent job of criticizing the mainstream media. And she gives her colleagues a C+ for their coverage of this midterm election cycle. And she said, well, look, they didn't make all the same mistakes they made 2 years ago. They've made fact-checking Trump into a cottage industry, gotten over the hesitance to use the L word. They do call him a liar when it happens. Or even, she says, the R word, racist, as CNN did in its news coverage of the Trump ad that falsely accuses Democrats of helping Central American criminals invade America. But she said there's one big problem, and she's right. Too many journalists allow Trump to lead them around by the nose, which is why you've heard so very much about that migrant caravan in recent weeks. Wide-eyed coverage of his politically driven pet issues, primarily the supposed horrors of immigration, has dominated the past few weeks of news with a fixation on the refugees coming north through Mexico. Skepticism and context make an appearance in media reports, but it's often too little and too late. And it's the editors who have to kill these stories or bury them. But they feel they don't have much choice because television, especially the cable news channels, will take any move by Trump and turn it into a big story. And then the Times and the Post and the other papers have to say, well, can we be the ones who ignore this when television is going wall to wall with it? So restraint in covering Trump is something sorely needed. And I agree with Ms. Sullivan about that. And she goes on to say, Trumpian falsehoods have widely escalated in recent weeks, and the media have not figured out how to deal with them. Take a recent headline in The Hill. Trump, I wouldn't be surprised if Soros were paying for migrant caravan. Well, that came out of a question from a reporter who asked Trump if he thought Soros might be financing it. The full answer was, I don't know who, but I wouldn't be surprised. So it's really a non-answer, but Axios got the exclusive on that, and they tweeted it out and turned it into a much bigger story than it might have been. She also says that while it's ugly that Trump calls journalists the enemy of the people, we do harm by overreacting to it and the familiar charges of liberal bias. So I give her high marks there for criticism. It's rare that you find that in the corporate media, particularly aimed at the corporate media. And today, Trump had a momentary amnesia attack when a reporter asked him about his reaction to Facebook and other news outlets pulling his racist immigration ad, the Brucamontes ad. He said, I don't know about it. We have lots of ads. A lot of things are offensive. Now, this is the ad that was pinned to the top of his Twitter feed for a couple of days, and we're told has 6 million views. And Facebook is saying that they won't allow any paid posting of it, but if any Facebook member user wants to post it, they will not pull it down or otherwise censor it. And you know how when you watch TV and you see these political commercials, and at the beginning or the end you see the candidate, often for the only time in the ad, and they say, hi, I'm Bubba, and I approve this ad. I approve this message. Well, that came out of a reform back in 2003 or 2004, where Congress required that tag to be added. It was an attempt to get people to run more positive ads because, they had to approve the content and say so. But a study shows that 61% of the political ads running in the midterm campaigns are negative. And some of them are deeply negative and offensive. Duncan Hunter here in California, who's facing the 57-count campaign finance law indictment, attacks his Palestinian, Mexican-American opponent, Ammar Campa-Najjar, as trying to infiltrate Congress for the Muslim Brotherhood. And Chris Collins, no relation, Republican of upstate New York under indictment on insider trading, is attacking his opponent, Nate McMurray, who is married to a naturalized South Korean, speaking Korean. And then they claim falsely that McMurray wanted fewer jobs for us and more for China and Korea. So it really has reached a low point. The one exception is Beto O'Rourke, who's sitting on, he raised over $60 million for his Senate campaign against Ted Cruz. They are neck and neck. I think O'Rourke is still trailing in the polls. But he refused to run any negative ads, and I believe he has held to that pledge. Of all of the campaigns that we've seen, I share the aspirations of many. Beto O'Rourke is not perfect, no candidate is. But if he can knock off Ted Cruz and bring that liberal populist message from Texas to Washington, now that could make a difference. Speaking of Texas, Trump is not the only one who has made up lies about the dangers posed by so-called illegal immigrants. It is fascinating to see how the mind of the Trump supporter works, and even when his policies produce severe personal loss, many of them still stick with their guy. And in North Dakota, where Heidi Heitkamp is trying to save her own political life, and it's not looking good, soybean farmers in Cass County, which is the single county that produces more soybeans for export than any other in the United States, they have seen their exports to China decline by 94% since last year. And this is all because of Trump's trade war and the tariffs that have been threatened, tariffs that have been imposed. And so, over at the Arthur Companies, operating 6 grain elevators in eastern North Dakota, they have started to pile 1 million bushels of soybeans on a patch of ground behind some of the silos. The big mound of beans, already one of the taller hills in this flat part of the world, will then be covered with tarps. And I don't know how long it takes soybeans to rot when you got them covered by a tarp and the winter rains come along, but their bet is that prices will rise before the beans rot. And I don't think they're going to win that bet. Stacey Abrams is the historic African-American woman running for governor of Georgia against the notorious Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. And I want to credit Russ Baker and his crew at Who, What, Why. They have pulled out all the stops to cover the voter suppression efforts of the Republicans. And over the weekend, they broke a story based on a report that they received. And this report did not involve any hacking. I want to make that clear from the outset. So what happened is Georgia Democrats were alerted to what they believe to be major vulnerabilities in the state's voter registration system. A citizen discovered that on his My Voter page on the Secretary of State's website, he could see the files of other voters. And that man then reached out to the client of the Morrison Forster law firm, and they passed the word along to an attorney who ultimately notified the Secretary of State's office and the FBI. So no hacking involved. A Georgia resident stumbled upon files of other voters on his My Voter page on the Secretary of State's website. Now, at minimum, this is a huge embarrassment to Brian Kemp. He's running an election that is vulnerable to hackers, including Russians. Now, instead of saying, oh my gosh, we're going to do everything we possibly can to fix that and make sure that nobody hacks into the election tomorrow, no, what he did was he went public with this. The public had no knowledge of this until Brian Kemp accused the Democrats of hacking and launched an investigation into alleged Democratic hacking of the voter registration system in Florida. Now, Who, What, Why contacted 5 different cybersecurity experts, and none of them would test the vulnerabilities without permission from the Secretary of State. But several logged on to the My Voter page to look at the code used to build the site, something that any Georgia voter could do with a little instruction, and confirmed the voter registration system's vulnerabilities. So then on Saturday night, they notified Secretary of State Kemp and 2 of his allies of serious potential cyber vulnerability in the registration files that had been discovered without any hacking. But an hour later, Kemp put out the statement saying his office had launched a hacking investigation. So, because the polling shows this race so tight, if I had to place a bet today, it would be on Brian Kemp. Because he controls the election, he is manipulating this latest development. And I have to say that revelation of this offers an opportunity for hackers all across the United States, and yes, even beyond our borders, to have a little fun with the Peach State. We'll see what happens. Tom Steyer is the billionaire here in San Francisco who has spent $50 million running ads supporting impeachment of Trump, and he spent another $30 million on Next Gen America, a liberal advocacy group. And Next Gen just released a poll showing that voters between 18 and 35 are predicted to increase their participation from 23% in the midterm elections of 2014 to 37%, at least in 6 key states where they polled young voters. The states are Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. All of those are battleground states this year. So I hope that Tom Steyer's polling is correct. I would love to see higher turnout and participation by young people, and it could change the outcome and change the complexion of the House, less likely the Senate. And one more note on the midterms. Chris Kobach of Kansas, Greg Palast notes, the letters are KKK. He's the guy who's also a Secretary of State, the leading Republican voter suppression activist in this country. And The Guardian from London reported something I haven't seen in any American media outlet. Chris Kobach has accepted financial donations from white nationalist sympathizers and for more than 10 years been affiliated with groups espousing white supremacist views. Donors include a former official in the Trump administration who was forced to resign from Homeland Security after emails showed he had close ties to white supremacists. And we've got the Dodge City polling place maneuver, which has led to a lawsuit by the ACLU. That is seen as racist because it's intending to suppress participation by Hispanics. Dodge City has the largest population of Latinos in the state of Kansas. And he has a long history of association with groups that espouse white nationalist views, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Not a big surprise, but again, something that hasn't been reported on properly in the American media. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Carla Mahoney, William Janetta, Teresa Paris, that's good old Terry Paris in Berkeley, and Brian Mazzy. They kick in $5, sometimes $10 a month. You can do it too, I'm sure. And if you can't, don't worry about it. But if you're able, would you step up today? Visit peterbcollins.com. Click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. It's easy. You can set up a $5, $10, or $20 a month subscription. Take our annual $50 deal. That'll earn you the bonus CD, John Dist's new CD called American University. And if you're allergic to PayPal, yo comprendo, you can drop your correspondence to Peter B. Collins, Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150, 660, San Rafael, 94915. Our friend and colleague Joe Laria broke a story over the weekend. He was participating in one of the ongoing watches or kind of vigils for Julian Assange. And he learned that a week ago today, Julian Assange was awakened early in the morning by an attempted break-in to his residence inside the Embassy of Ecuador in London. And the scene is interesting. Assange had set up his own little booby trap to wake him up, and he appears to be unmolested by the event. But in recent days, scaffolding has appeared against the embassy building in the Knightsbridge section of London, and that scaffolding obscures the embassy's security cameras. And Laria has information from Sean O'Brien, a lecturer at Yale University Law School, a cybersecurity expert. He was in London. He walked up to the embassy. He opened the door, which was unlocked. He walked in. He found no security present. Someone from the embassy emerged to tell him if he wanted to see Assange to send them an email. So he did from his phone, but they refused to check whether it had been received and processed. So O'Brien then noticed more scaffolding being erected, and he observed a series of surveillance devices. Again, he's an expert on cybersecurity. He said, "I've taken a lot of pictures of surveillance equipment. I've never seen devices quite like this. They are curious plastic tubes with yellow-orange caps zip-tied to the front. I have no idea what they are, but they seem to have equipment inside them." And O'Brien said previous visitors had described it to him closed and locked doors, security guards manning the desk at all times, privacy drapes, dark rooms. But he said, the Ecuadorian embassy is open for business, wide open. We're going to have to keep an eye on that. Today is the day that Iran starts to feel the snapped-back sanctions. As you know, Trump unilaterally pulled the United States out of the six-party nuclear deal with Iran, and he's imposing sanctions aimed at limiting oil exports and strangling the Iranian economy. And President Hassan Rouhani said, "We will proudly break the sanctions." And they are illegal. They are a type of psychological warfare, and Iran will not submit. Additionally, Iran's military and Revolutionary Guard Corps staged joint war drills in the northern and western parts of the country starting today. The exercises include air defense systems, anti-aircraft batteries. And the real issue is, will these sanctions isolate Iran as Trump hopes? Or will they isolate the United States, which appears more likely because Europe is not buying into them? Now, the assassination by the Saudis of Jamal Khashoggi has really caused the media to focus again on the brutal war in Yemen and the millions of people on the brink of starvation. And in an Axios interview conducted yesterday, Trump said the air attack in August on a school bus in Yemen by Saudi-led coalition forces was the result of the bombers misusing the weapon. 51 people died, including 40 children, in that attack. Trump said, well, he was asked if he was bothered by it, and he said, well, more than bothered. He said the attack was a horror show. And he said, we don't like it. Wait a minute. Here's what he said. That was basically people that didn't know how to use the weapon, which is horrible. I'll be talking about a lot of things with the Saudis, but I certainly I wouldn't be having people that don't know how to use the weapons shooting at buses with children. So it is, one kind of unexpected benefit of the Khashoggi incident that there is more scrutiny on Saudi Arabia. And I have praised today for the New York Times, of which I'm often critical, but in a Sunday story front-paged, advisory firms cultivate roles as Saudi allies. We learn that the big American contractors who serve the Pentagon, the spook industries, and others, led by Booz Allen Hamilton, McKinsey & Company, and Boston Consulting Group, they have lapped up huge paid contracts from the administration of Mohammed bin Salman since he took over. The firms earn hundreds of millions of dollars on projects in Saudi Arabia, and they are undeterred by the Khashoggi assassination. They didn't say they'd pull out of that business fair that MBS held. Nope, they are busy. In fact, Booz Allen Hamilton has a contract to run the Navy of Saudi Arabia. And they deny that they, participate in the actual decisions, for example, about the naval blockade of Yemen. But they make the plans that are executed by the Saudi Navy. And the Boston Consulting Group landed a contract to overhaul the procurement systems of the Defense Ministry in Saudi Arabia. And McKinsey has been working on security, and they filed reports on individuals, one of whom was subsequently arrested. The other, who is self-exiled in Canada, saw his two brothers arrested and thrown into jail. That is the work of American contractors. Oh, and Booz Allen Hamilton also advises the Saudi army. It won a contract to help with logistics, including maintaining their Abrams tanks. Now, this shows that the military-industrial complex is riddled with contractors who are multinational. They're the globalists that Trump rails against. And we have no confidence that they're not selling our secrets or otherwise compromising the U.S. security as they profiteer in the brutal kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Another good report by the New York Times compares the enforcement of corporate violations under the Trump administration during its first 20 months with the final 20 months of enforcement under Obama. And you won't be surprised by this. There's been a 62% drop in penalties imposed and illicit profits ordered returned by the Securities and Exchange Commission. A 72% decline in corporate penalties from the Justice Department's criminal prosecutions. And a lighter touch toward the banking industry with the Securities Exchange Commission ordering banks to pay only this is written backwards. Trump's Justice Department has brought 17 cases compared with 71, and the Obama people collected 4 times as much, $1.7 billion, from offending banks during their final 20 months in office. I think you get the gist. Couple of protests, boycotts, have started up against Amazon. Now, one is based here in San Francisco, where an online outlet called Abe Books is the subject of Banned Booksellers Week. So the purveyors of rare and hard-to-find books have a thriving trade, but suddenly the contractor Abe Books that has the exclusive at Amazon announced that they are cutting off Korea, that's South Korea, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Russia. They will no longer sell books in those countries. Now, they're claiming it's because of their online payment service and that, they didn't mean to do this. But the other rare booksellers are collectively fighting back. And here's a quote from Scott Brown, who sells books in Eureka, California. Abe Books is saying, "We're cutting you and your country off. It's nothing you did. We just decided we don't want to deal with you anymore." He said it's infuriating. So the other boycott that is looming for Amazon is because Amazon is run by Jeff Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post. And certain members of the Saudi royal family are talking about a boycott of Amazon because they don't like what the Post has been writing, coverage of the Khashoggi assassination. And finally today, I got an email from listener Jerry Fresha, who is self-exiled in Italy. And that produces jealousy from many of us who are hunkering down on the mainland, Jerry. He said, "I have to tell you how much I liked your thrashing of Professor Shudson. You took him apart. Just goes to show how much Kool-Aid drinking goes into getting a tenured track position. I also enjoyed your discussion with Aaron Mate. He is a rising star." Then he touts an upcoming book to be published by Lisa Pease called The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. And he goes on to say maybe Professor Shudson can explain why this little nugget related to Chappaquiddick hasn't been explored by our fearless Fifth Estate and so many other nuggets. Thanks, Jerry. Always good to hear from you. I love my worldwide audience, and you're welcome to be in touch at any time. My email is peter@peterbcollins.com. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Please share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling